Hello, welcome to the Present of Work. And we are the co-founders of this nonprofit project where we explore the whole spectrum of the human experience of work, from the dark side to the bright side and every color in between. And our intention is to invite ourselves and all of you to explore deeper our relationship to work, how we're working, what is working for us, and what is not working. Um, and Brandon and I, BK, well, that's Brandon's stage name. BK and I are uh, want to start this series of explorations where we learn from our most recent tensions in our collaboration. By tension, it could be a interpersonal conflict, it could be a disagreement, it could be a mixed mistake. It could be a big or giant mistake that we have made so far. Um, and yeah, so today, so we want to share our mistakes and tensions with you and how we're making sense of it. And we want to strike the iron while it's hot, while this tension just happened, and we just try to make some sense of it and share these sense making and musings with you so that you might also resonate and it might also help you to see the tensions, the mistakes, the failures, the so-called failures in your collaboration, in your team or organization or community. Um, so, by the way, I still have a lingering cough from my flu, so apologize for that in advance. Um, yeah, today we're going to look at a tension, a kind of recurring tension that is happening and in our collaboration. Um, and also our collaboration is, in this case, it's just between us, but we also collaborate with a lot, many collaborators outside of this nonprofit project. And we also witnessed many, many collaborations in our lives. Um, so this particular incident is about feeling being hijacked in meetings, is about feeling being hijacked when one of us thinks we're leading a initiative or leading a meeting or thinks we're facilitating something or um, thinks we're taking a leader role. And yeah, so feeling hijacked, I'll make it very specific for now, is feeling hijacked in a meeting. Um, Maybe it's like I'm feeling I'm going this way. I just raised a question, but um, but somehow you are, you know, dragging me, that's how I feel, dragging me to somewhere else to talk about a different topic. Um, yeah, so that's how I feel. BK, I'd like to invite you to kind of just talk a little bit about how that feeling um, feels for you.
Yeah, great segue into um the great train robbery of meetings. Yeah, oftentimes you may come into a meeting um and then have the rug kind of feel like it's being pulled out from under your feet.
Mm,
And as you feel like things are going sideways, you're like, oh, what happened? Like either I'm being misunderstood, or I'm being ignored, or
mm,
uh, I'm I'm kind of finding that what I'm saying is not landing, or
mm,
being heard, and that can be a frustrating experience. In those times, it can either go one of two ways. It can kind of accelerate the gap in communication, where either one can become more defensive, or in this scenario, you know I can't remember if I became more defensive or you became more defensive, but in some ways it just kind of it took a downward spiral.
Yeah, yeah,
And instead of the upward spiral of trying to meet each other where we were at, we tried to yank the other,
yeah.
kind of creating this tug of war tension. And that was kind of my experience of it. There was kind of a heating up, like a little bit of butting of heads, and kind of not seeing each other.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I definitely became defensive at some point. And then I bet the tendency is that I would think you were defensive first, and then you might think I'm defensive first. Right? Like, um, um, yeah, and then like I notice my tendency is I might want you to see, how you're deviating first. And then,
Mm,
and then that ended up we're rehashing the past, right? Even if it just
mm,
happened a few minutes ago. But then the rehashing doesn't really help because we didn't really record our conversation. Um, so yeah, so just get trapped. And that's one way of feeling being hijacked, or one way of derailing is that we just get trapped and dragged into the past and trying to figure out, oh no, look at you, you did this. And then you say, look at
mm,
me, you did that. Um, yeah, and our communication has been very, our intention is to be direct and also honest. So that's why we're saying, look at you, look at me. But in many other collaboration situations, maybe one party would not say that because they don't feel safe or it's not their style to actually say, oh, look at this, right? Then one party might just swallow it, maybe I have less power than you, right? Then I just swallow it or sweep it under the carpet, and
mm,
then over time it festers. And then I would think that, oh, BK is always derailing me, is always now I don't want to be in the same meeting with DK anymore. Either he's more powerful than me, or he has,
mm,
I started to attribute like being my feeling of being hijacked to you, and then to your intention. Maybe BK is just, a dominating person, you know,
mm,
and and then I don't want to be in collaboration with you anymore.
mm,
Um, but luckily, I think I don't know if it's lucky or not, but it's just in our communication, in our collaboration, we really our intention is to try to stay with the tension, try to be with it. And even though we get derailed, we just still be at it, be with it, to really figure out what is the disconnect between you and me. So after quite a few long conversations in the past couple of months, the most recent one is I think 2 days ago. Now we kind of like start to understand there are at least like three types of ways to derail, to hijack. Um, or nobody intends to hijack, by the way, but it oftentimes one party start feeling being hijacked, right? So we want to share with you, the audience, three kind of at least three. I'm gonna name one, two, one, two, three, and then Brandon, if you have new ones you want to add or modify, definitely chime in. So the first type of factor of derailing a conversation is is the is that people are not on the same page when they come to a meeting. Maybe I'm the person who is going to lead that meeting, and then I want to start about this topic, but then other people um, might not be on the same page of the context of this topic. Um, so, for example, the example is Brandon and I will do planning for agile planning. What we're not doing software, but we use agile planning to manage our nonprofit project. And so we do planning every 2 weeks. And oftentimes Brandon might want to lead, us to go into planning, but I show up at this meeting still thinking about a lot of the larger pieces. What happened before this sprint, what happened after, and um, one tension came that I actually haven't really. Finally, Brandon helped me to see that there is also a stage called pre-planning before the planning. So so oftentimes I show up without doing the pre-planning. And then Brandon already wants to lead me into planning. And that's one you know one factor that made BK feel kind of derailed and hijacked by me because need I still have questions about this and this, and it's all belongs to planning. Um yeah, you want to add a little, anything to this type of kind of derailment, BK?
Yeah. I think you kind of covered the scenario pretty well. Um, in I liked one thing you were saying around, just even the missing of the slightest context can
Mm,
kind of put people in different places and then therefore derail because like you're not on the same page.
yeah.
And there's something about that where there are expectations kind of coming into any meeting that if they're kind of not either agreed upon up front or like stated at the beginning of the meeting, like people can be starting from very different places, which can lead to misperception of what's happening between those people.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So then the second type of derailment also is related to this kind of it came up during that planning um conversation. It's related to people are at different levels of abstraction, oftentimes, when we're talking about a project. Um, to give a specific example, I'll use the same example of the planning. We were supposed to plan for the next 2 weeks, but then that 2 weeks also landed. Hap it is at the oh, it's actually this month. We're planning for this week and next week, and then right now it's March the 13th, 2025. No, March the 16th, 2025. So it just happened this last Monday. Um, we were supposed to plan for this week and next week, but then it is also at the end of this quarter. So when I showed up at you know, the planning session, and when Brandon was facilitating and asked me, "Oh, what do you think needs to happen, between this week and next week?" Then I started thinking about, oh, this is the end of the quarter. I started, jumping to the level of abstraction. I started looking at our quarterly plan for this quarter and started looking ahead the next quarter, but then that is at a different level of abstraction. The quarterly plan is more kind of higher the abstraction, and then the weekly, every 2 week plan is more concrete on the ground, right? And so I was jumping, and then Brandon felt hijacked. But Brandon, I remember you asked me, do you think it belongs to um it belongs to our sprint planning? Maybe we should bring it up in the quarterly planning. And yeah, and then in my mind I just made that jump. Um and yeah, thanks to Brendan when you pointed out. Do you want to, fill in your perspective, how you were, either it's your experience or of that particular scenario, or you want to, bring it to more general?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, subjective experience was, yeah, we were shifting from like a narrow lens into like this much wider thing we were trying to like hug, and I felt you kind of trying to go up and give the bear a hug and like pick up the bear, and I'm like, oh no, like this is we're not picking up the bear today. That's on Mondays, like not today. Like we train for that in a different place. But I think coming into the meeting, um the level setting expectations of like purpose of the meeting, scope of the meeting, like some of that, I also think is decided up front, and it has to be seen by all the parties involved. And I think like one thing I reflected on was, okay, like how we set up the containers for these different types of decisions and information. Like sometimes we should look at that, like what is the purpose of this meeting, and maybe just like state that up front. And I think like even, I don't know if we're getting into solutions at all, but I think like even recently we've started to do intention setting, like what do we want to get out of this meeting. And I feel like that's been kind of a helpful way to like bring in like what the expectations or assumptions are. That way we can kind of see, we're inviting each other to see each other.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think in my observations of, my own collaboration and other teams, when I, consult or facilitate other teams, um, some teams, many teams do have a like agenda, like, oh, this is what we're going to talk about. But I think there's still oftentimes that disconnect between the people who's leading the meeting and then other people, right? It's so sometimes just stating it, oh, today is the we're planning for the next 2 weeks, right? Just stating it will not completely prevent the derailment later. Because you and I actually, last this past Monday, we did come in and say we're gonna do the sprint planning for this next 2 weeks, right? I had that in mind. I agree. Like, however, because that, this 2 weeks is also the end of the quarter, like my mind just automatically made that jump because
Mm.
I need to see, oh, this is the end of the quarter. Did we finish anything? Do I need to, did we promised anything for the quarter that we haven't done? And so it's just, yeah, it's that. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think this actually brings maybe to the third derailment. The third derailment is more general. In some ways, it kind of helps to explain the first two derailments. The third derailment is called the interpersonal gap. Um, so oftentimes people assume that communication is straightforward. When I say something, it's like I'm throwing a ball to you and you're, yeah, you're getting the ball exactly. And you see it exactly the ball that I intended to give you. But if you look at communication research, if you look at group dynamics, interpersonal communication, that is, it's a wrong metaphor. It's not throwing a ball. This is called the interpersonal gap, which is I have intention. I think I picture a thing in my mind, and when I communicate to you, that thing will go through my filters, which is my filters is, maybe it's because of my education. When I describe this ball, I'll use certain vocabulary. Maybe it's my cultural background, right? So I have the ball in my mind, but I'll describe it in different words through my filter. And then you'll hear the words, and then you have your filter to interpret the words. And then it will be an image of a ball landing in your mind. It might even not be a ball. If I didn't, if I communicate vaguely about this thing I have in mind, I won't say the word ball. I'll say something else, and it might, by the time it lands in your mind, um, it's a completely it could be a completely different thing. And so that in some ways also explains when people are at different ladder of abstraction, and also, the lack of context. Um, So, um, yeah, so I just noticed going back to the same sprint planning meeting, my mind just went to the quarterly planning level. I didn't even tell you I did that. I just started when you asked me, "Oh, Carol, what do you want to do the next 2 weeks?" I started opening a Miro board about, and then that has all the quarterly plan. I started looking at it without even telling you. Um, and so then I start saying things to you. I have this case, the quarterly plan is the ball. I was talking and and then you heard like what did you hear? Do you recall that experience? Or maybe I'm misremembering things.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like a meta comment is like, back to what you were saying about the recordings, like the more time we have to record as it's fresh, like the less revisions we kind of go through. Because like I think like the insights that we're generating now are like really tremendous. Like now hearing it said in the way that it's being said is like helpful for me. The right, but I kind of took a quote from you, and I ad-libbed a little bit, but like the ripeness for miscommunication increases with different levels of abstraction and lack of context.
Mm,
And I think when I didn't have the context that you were switching gears
yeah.
and zooming out into like a much wider field of activity, um I was getting lost in like, why are we solving the big picture problem when we need to decide what we're going to do tomorrow. And I think like there's something interesting in that, because I've definitely done that. I've switched gears and people have lost like how I move to the next segment. And I think like for me it comes back to a desire to make sense of things in a way that my filters work. But like sometimes that desire can supersede the proceedings of what's happening.
Yeah.
And so therefore I have to reorganize what's happening in the way that my filters work. And I think like that can be a little bit of a shock, if you're in some way stepping into the role of reorganizing the information landscape and saying, we're not going to focus here, we're going to focus here. And like that feels jolting. And I do think in that situation, I was like, oh, whoa, like we're no longer focused on tomorrow, we're focused on the next month or like quarter. And there's a world of difference in how to look at things from a quarterly view versus like the next week or so view. So yeah, that those are just some kind of interesting things that came up. But one other thing I wanted to say, like when you were talking about the ball, maybe like we assume that it's like a straightforward throw. I thought about Tetris. Like Tetris, you're going ding, 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 ding. It takes a lot of hops for the message to land, and you don't quite control the feel in that way. And I thought that was a fun analogy to add.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. Yeah, we don't control. It's not like I intentionally want to, miscommunicate. Like I thought I was going straight, and then you thought you were interpreting straight. But it's Tetris in the end. Um, yeah, yeah. Oh, actually, um, maybe we won't go into this, but I want to actually share with our audience. Um, After that long conversation, from the sprint planning meeting, um, you and I really, I think especially you, really started looking at the filters that we each implicitly have, knowingly or unknowingly, and then how information will be filtered out. Um, that cause bigger and bigger interpersonal gap. Maybe that will be another time for us to go deeper into those. You actually named 5 layers, 5 layers of filters. Um, I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, so if I think we'll stop here. Um, and we invite you, the listener, if there's anything that you feel you resonate with what we have shared, feel free to, let us know in the comment. If you want us to go deeper into any one of those types of derailment, let us know. And yeah, and then in the future, we might actually kind of do a deeper dive into the interpersonal gap because
Mm.
it's so fascinating. I find that interpersonal gap in my relationship, in my marriage, in how I talk to a person on the street, in my deep collaboration with all my collaborators. Um, so yeah, so maybe that's something to come in the future. Um, yeah, anything, how shall we end this little uh exploration?
Yeah, it makes me also think of a few potential topics in the future. So I'll just list them. But yeah, I thought this was a great episode, and I do feel like it helps to record out loud, you know, think in public, work in public, whatever analogy you want to use. I think there was one other, I mean, and I don't know where, if it would, where you would put it in kind of the spectrum of derailments, but I do think you have a concept of being on your side of the net,
Mm,
that I think would be good to introduce next time. You started off the call with a perception of power dynamics, and I
mm,
do think there's something there. There's a lot of subjective experience of like, oh, this
yes,
person is older than me, this person is more senior than me, this
yes.
person has more power than me. Therefore, like I'm reacting to something that's in my kind of only in my imagination of the
Mm,
person, and I've attributed qualities and traits, and I'm kind of boxing against this image of a person, whether the person is doing those things or not.
mm,
And I do think it can cause like something I call the perception of like I need to be tough,
mm,
rather than like I need to just be enough. So
mm.
toughness versus enoughness, I think, is like a concept I'm exploring, but hope
Wow.
hope to explore that one day with you, Carol.
Wow. Oh, now I want to start another recording right away. Yeah, yeah, I need to be tough versus where I need to be enough, versus I am enough. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, I want to schedule that conversation with you. All
Great.
right. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Let us what you think in the comments. Ciao for now.